Welcome to The Explainer. If you've been to a gas station in California recently, you know the feeling. But that crazy high price you're paying, well, it's more than just a hit to your wallet. It's actually a sign of a much bigger story playing out, one that involves our energy, our economy, and yeah, even our national security.
All right, let's just jump right in with a question that sounds completely nuts. Could you actually afford to pay $10 or even $12 for a single gallon of gas? I know, it sounds impossible, but it's a real scenario that some petroleum experts are warning could be in the cards for California drivers.
So, to understand how a $12 gallon isn't just some crazy fantasy, we've got to look at what Californians are already dealing with at the pump right now.
Just look at these numbers from this past December. The average price in California was $4.34. Now, compare that to the U.S. average of $2.90. That's right, Californians are already paying nearly $1.50 more for every single gallon. That adds up fast.
So, what is going on here? Why are prices so high? And, more importantly, why is the situation about to get a whole lot worse? Well, the answer to that really gets to the heart of the problem, and it's something people are calling the refinery exodus.
Here's the deal. Two of the biggest players in the state's fuel game, Valero and Phillips 66, are shutting down their massive refineries in Benicia and Los Angeles. And we're not talking about small-time operations here. These closures are going to send huge ripple effects through the entire state's energy supply.
And just think about what this really means. Just these two facilities closing down will wipe out nearly 20% of California's entire in-state refining capacity. That's a massive chunk of the supply chain that's basically going to vanish overnight.
So the big question is, why are they packing up and leaving? Well, if you ask the companies, they'll tell you the business environment is just incredibly tough. They point to a mix of super high operating costs and, frankly, some of the strictest environmental regulations in the whole country.
For example, let's look at the state's low-carbon fuel standard. Now, the goal is noble, right? To make fuels cleaner, to cut down on emissions, but for a refiner, it's kind of like being told you have to bake a cake. But every year, the ingredients you're required to use get more and more expensive. It just adds a ton of cost to every single barrel of gasoline they make.
And believe me, this regulatory pressure isn't just talk. It has some serious teeth. Just this past October, Valero got slammed with an $82 million fine for toxic chemical releases. And that wasn't just any fine. It was the single largest one ever handed out by the Regional Air District. Ever.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. This comes straight from the top. Valero CEO Lane Riggs was incredibly blunt about it. He called California's regulatory environment, and I quote, the most stringent and difficult of anywhere else in North America.
But this whole story gets bigger than just what you're paying at the pump. A lot bigger. Because the fallout from these refinery closures is now setting off alarm bells at the highest levels of our government, all the way up to the Pentagon.
You have to remember, California has a massive military presence. We're talking over 30 bases, major Air Force hubs, sprawling Army installations, you name it. And every single one of them relies on that local, in-state fuel supply to keep their planes in the air and their tanks on the move.
And to really put this into perspective, the Department of Defense is the single largest institutional user of petroleum in the world. So when California's own fuel production takes a nosedive, it forces the U.S. military to depend more and more on foreign oil, making us vulnerable to all sorts of geopolitical drama in unstable parts of the world.
And this is where it gets really serious. Lawmakers like Representative Stan Ellis aren't even talking about this as an economic problem anymore. They see it as a critical threat to our national security. His warning is pretty stark. He says if a rival nation decides to cut off that supply, the result could be, in his words, catastrophic for military readiness.
So, that's a pretty scary warning, right? But it's not the only side to this story. The state government in Sacramento, well, they have a very different opinion about this whole threat.
And this right here is where the debate really heats up. On one side, you have federal lawmakers screaming that this is a catastrophic risk. But on the other side, the Newsom administration has come out and said firmly that there is no credible risk to the military's fuel supply or its readiness. They're pointing to the state's bigger energy plans and different ways to get fuel.
Okay, so you've got these two completely opposite arguments flying around. What in the world does this new reality mean for you, the average California driver? I mean, what can you actually do about any of this?
Well, here's some good news. Experts say there are some practical things you can do. First off, shop around. You'd be shocked, but prices can vary by over $1 a gallon inside the same city. Second, timing your fill-ups can actually help. Gas tends to be a bit cheaper earlier in the week.
And, for the long haul, it might just be time to start rethinking how we get around. Maybe more carpooling or public transit. And that really brings us to the final multi-billion-dollar question here. As California pushes forward towards a greener, cleaner future, are these sky-high prices and potential security risks just the price of admission? Is this the unavoidable cost of progress? That's the incredibly complex trade-off at the heart of this entire debate, and it's one every single Californian is going to have to grapple with.